There we go. And then I'll hand over to you, Susanna, to get the presentation started.
Brilliant. Hopefully you can hear me. I was having some sound issues. Oh, you can. Fantastic. I did have a moment I thought it was not going to work, as it normally tends to happen. Hi, everyone. For those who don't know me, as you're saying, I'm the head of connections in the system operator. Connections seems to be the thing, and the problems and the challenges, the things that keep me kind of going through the day and awake at night at present. So hopefully, can you hear me better? I hope. I just think I'm having some problems. You can. Fantastic. So if you go to you can. If you go to the first slide, the next one. When we talk about connections and the challenges, how can we summarize it? So we try to summarize it in the simplest way possible, whereby we say that currently, yes, so we've got enough or even above contracted generation to meet our net zero targets for 2030 and a little bit beyond, going to 2035. That means that we have got a growing connections queue waiting to connect. And that means that through the framework that we have at the moment of first come, first served basis, we're not able to really enable those that are ready to connect, to come forward to connect, because we have to treat very much those customers on the base of that queue position. And when we take into consideration that approximately only 30 to 40% of those projects actually come to deliver and come to connect, we see the problem of this large queue of connections presenting a big challenge to make sure we can connect the right technologies in the right places to meet those net zero targets. And for all of those that are there waiting to connect, to connect in the timescales that are right for you. If we go to the next slide. So what are we doing about it? And apologies if the summary is quite quick, but I think they're important to go on what we're trying to do as a business. So we have in the screen what is a 5-point plan that we issued in not when I say mid, so 22nd of February, we released a 5-point plan to provide an update to the industry on what we're trying to do. Those 5 points can be summarized into a tech amnesty, the way we model the assumptions, the way we do the studies for connections we're trying to change and review, the way we treat storage, the way we want to manage those in the queue, the way we want to manage that take queue, and also how we're looking at it to try to bring customers to connect earlier via different arrangements such as non-firm. I won't go into detail to all of this because this presentation is going to give you that insight and that information via myself talking some about it, and other colleagues like Andy and Javid will come onto the call later on. So we got to the first point, so the tech amnesty. We go to the next slide, thank you. And then this one, there we are. So tech amnesty, what is tech amnesty? Tech amnesty is the exercise whereby we open a window or a period for customers to come forward to express their interest to terminate their contracts to no costs or reduce costs. These are for those contracts, for those projects that are no longer viable, and therefore that they were too fearful to come forward to terminate, because every single contract is has got termination costs associated with it. So we're just trying to say, if it's not viable, please come forward. We need that tech to be able to kind of moved or passed on to others that are ready to connect. So we're doing this in coordination with the transmission owners and Ofgem as well. We started this period, or this window of expression of interest, in October 2022. Initially, we were going to run it up until April 2023. However, we're now looking if we're going to extend it. The reason of perhaps the extension is just on the back of the delay that we're seeing with queue management cost modification coming through. This is very early doors. We're not sure or not at the moment. We're still saying April 2023. We're going to see, is there a need to extend? Do we need to do something? In the meantime, what the team is already doing, they're already working with Ofgem and working with TOs to try to see if those projects that come forward to terminate their contract can indeed terminate with reduced or no costs. We have so far a total of 5.5 gigawatts of expressions of interest that for customers to terminate those contracts. So that's 5.5 gigawatts. They're being reviewed at present. And we, I think that's a very quick stop on or explanation on tech amnesty, but we can take any questions. I see there's some coming through. We can take them later on. So if we go to the next slide, that brings us Javid, which is probably a slightly more complex part of this presentation. Javid, if you're okay to come in.
Thank you, Susanna. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Javid Rostam. I'm the Connections Operability Assessment Manager in the ESO. And I'll be presenting on two key aspects today. One is regarding to the construction planning assumptions and also the way we model storage. So if we can move to the next slide, please. Right, so so constructions planning assumptions essentially are the generation backgrounds that we provide to the transmission owners, which will be used as the basis of studies that will be done as part of the connections process. So currently, as you're all aware, we have a very oversubscribed generation backgrounds. And essentially, if you put all of this into the studies are indicating that the network will be constrained, driving a lot of enabling works and therefore delaying connection dates. We've done some exercise internally within National Grid ES over the last, essentially looking at over the last 10 years, how many projects actually make it to fruition. And what we realize is essentially about 30 to 40% of projects actually will end up connecting. And we are aware, as Sue mentioned, essentially our common goal is to achieve net zero together. And essentially in the National Grid ESO, what we've done is adopt new principles for the construction planning assumptions, which are presented here, which essentially more accurately reflect the level of attritions that we are seeing. So when we provide or create the construction planning assumptions for the TOs, we divide the system study into two regions, so the local and wider. So essentially what we'll be doing going forward is applying a 50% attrition rate to the megawatt capacity of projects in the local regions. And that will be applied to projects that have not achieved consents. And we will do so applying to each technology type as well. In the wider region, we intend to use a 66% attrition, closely to the figures that we've seen in the historical view. And again, that will be applied to projects that have not achieved consents and also by technology type. And from a distribution energy resource perspective, we will also be applying 66% attrition to both the local and wider DER volume. If we can move to the next slide, please. So the second topic I wanted to talk about is the treatment of storage. And essentially, we all aware that storage will play an important role as an enabler of renewable energy penetration and facilitate that transition to net zero. Well, in terms of how BESS or storage is currently modeled, it's a fairly conservative approach. And essentially, from the feedback that we've had with various battery developers, we understand that essentially the nature and the way they intend to operate their assets may not always be correlated with when we have constraints on the network. So based on this feedback, which is sort of summarized in the various hexagons here, which I won't go into too much detail, but essentially based on that feedback, we have updated the approach for storage in our construction planning assumptions, essentially to align it more in line with how they intend to operate. And we will also be looking at a new type of non-firm connections. And by non-firm, essentially, I mean where our control room will have the ability to instruct various storage providers to essentially 0 megawatts if they're contributing to the constraints, but at 0 cost, so they will not be remunerated for those constraints. The intention is that these conditions of curtailments will be stipulated in the customer contracts so that they can get appreciation of when they are likely to be constrained, and will also allow them to carry out their own risk assessment to understand how frequently and when they are going to be constrained. And we're looking at also supporting with additional information that will help with that risk assessment. So essentially what we'll be looking at is an interim non-firm connection, which will be removed when enabling works are delivered. So it's a type of connection that enables storage to connect ahead of those enabling works, and provided that obviously visibility and control facilities are installed to enable the control room to control these assets when required. And from a CPA perspective, essentially if we're studying a condition where, let's say, for example, the system constraints are driven by a certain scenario where we wouldn't be expecting BERS to be exporting or importing at those times, the storage would be set to 0 megawatts in the assumptions. Yes, if you can move to the next slide, please. So this is a slide that again summarizes the various activities that we're currently going through at the moment. Again, I'll pick up on a couple of these. I've already mentioned that we've updated the energy storage modeling. We're also looking at essentially how the non-firm connection can potentially impact on certain service provisions, but also looking at the different contractual terms that we will have to include in the contracts for this type of new connections. From a control room perspective, we're also looking at what are the current processes where essentially we can control generation and various projects at the moment. And we're looking at what sort of timescales would be appropriate to issue these instructions, whether it's at day ahead or within day during real time to provide these curtailment signals. And from a storage developer perspective, we've also been engaging via the electricity storage network, the ESN, to engage with developers to understand what sort of information would be required in terms of doing that risk assessment and understanding from a developer's perspective when would be the appropriate timescales to receive those signals. So work is progressing in this space, and we expect essentially by the end of March this year to essentially complete this exercise. I think I'm now passing back to Suzanne. Thank you.
Thanks, David, and hopefully you can hear me okay. Apologies, it's just my microphone is not that great. It seems to be dying at the moment. So if we go to the next slide, we just wanted to provide a bit of an update in regards to that queue management. So as some of you might know, there's a CAS modification going through to try to introduce queue management clauses and milestones to manage that connection to the transmission construction contracts, or transmission connection contracts. And this is on the back of the ENA guidance that was supplied some time ago, which was introduced in part to the DNOs. But although we endeavoured to introduce a head of CAS modification back in September 2021, it was not something we could progress with because it was found to be not lawful to do so. So we had to go back to removing anything we had on the contracts with regards to key management and resume to focus on the CAS working group. So initially we had a target timeline that we we're going to be issuing a modification report to Ofgem on the 12th of April this year. Unfortunately, due to the fact that various different proposals were added to discussion as part of the working group, we've seen a delay on the timescales, and we have a delay of approximately 2 months. So we'll be going with the modification report to Ofgem in early June. The good news is we had voting earlier this week, and I think we're now very much on track to go to consultation in April. So there will be consultation with industry in April as part of the CAS process. What's queue management trying to do? We're just trying to make sure we introduce milestones to the project to be able to manage the certainty from the customer to progress with a part of the project, to be able to ensure that they are 100% certain that project is real, and make sure we remove those speculative projects out of the queue. As you can see, initially our CAS modification was just to apply queue management to new applications, to new offers, but following various engagements, sessions with Ofgem and industry and others, we've gone back with our proposal and we added an alternative that it says that we shall introduce or will introduce to all contracted connections. Because if you think about the fact we had circa 1,500 live contracted connections, and we have so much of a queue, we won't be able to address that queue if we can't apply queue management milestones retrospectively. So we can again look to try to remove those speculative projects out of the queue. What we're seeing with the delay of 2 months, the risk introduces is the fact that it delays opportunity to start managing the speculative projects in the queue. Also, we think it delays possibly an opportunity to try to address any changes to contracts as part of introducing queue management clauses, and do at the same time that we'll be doing updates to contracts as part of other initiatives, such as the transmission works review process that's happening, battery storage, etc. And also, as I showed earlier, the timeline for tech amnesty was up until April. That was based on the fact that the decision was going to be made or would be made by Ofgem around that time. So we're now looking at tech amnesty extension again to align with the queue management, to give an opportunity for all of those that don't want to enter a contract or have their contract updated to show those queue management milestones to terminate without consequences or very little as well. So that's queue management update. So if we go to the next slide, we're going to the two-step offer. So the two-step offer was another big part of our communication on the 22nd of February. What does it consist of, or why we're doing it? So we're introducing a two-step offer process, which is an interim process that will run for 12 months, started on the 1st of March, to enable in England and Wales for the TO to work with the ESO to undertake a review of those transmission works, transmission reinforcement works that are there in the background. They're kind of driving those long lead times for connections. And it's in order to review all that contractor background in England and Wales. So it's an opportunity to create a moment in time. So we freeze what the contractor background looks like. And in the meantime, we carry on producing offers to customers for 12 months under a slightly different arrangement, whereby we produce an initial offer. It's an initial offer that meets the standard requirements for an offer, identifies a customer connection site, which will be reflective of the connection point that was identified on the application. It will have a completion date as well. This offer will not have any securities, because we're not having or not providing the detail in terms of scope and program of works, etc., as part of this first offer. What we'll do, though, for any of those that sign on or accept the step one offer, we will then follow up that offer with what we're calling a step two. The second offer will have all the detail that you've been accustomed to see on ESO offers. So it'll be the program, the scope of works, and the cost as well. But that step two offer will be produced after the work to review the contractor background using our new construction planning assumptions that Javid just talked to you about, and also our new approach to how we model storage. So we can establish a new baseline for those new offers to be studied against, because our view is this process is going to enable not only to improve, we hope, connection timescales for some, we don't know yet the volume and how much, but looking to try to improve where possible and where suitable from the introduction of the new construction planning assumptions of best and modeling of the storage, to try to then look at that contractor background, improve what we can, and have a new baseline to assess new applications against, to ensure that we can produce you or can provide you with the best connection timescales, the best scope, and the best costs. So that's just a quick snapshot. We do have more information on our website. So if you go to the ESO website, you will find a page dedicated just to the two-step offer details, and we're happy to provide the link later on. If you go just to the next slide, still on the two-step offer, just a summary of steps. The process is started on the 1st of March 2023. It applies just to England and Wales offers only. The Scottish years, what they're doing is they're implementing the new CPAs by using current process. As I said, we do have web pages live on our website, so ESO's website. It's got an FAQ, it's got guidance documents. The process has been supported by Ofgem. On our website, you'll find the Ofgem letter as well. And the other thing to say is we are going to hold various webinars for the next 12 months. We're looking to have them every month. So they're webinars open to the industry. You'll find the dates on our website. And we'll also be providing more updates in regards to reports, how we're going to report, how we're going to govern this interim process, and the findings as well. We'll all be kind of coming back out of the industry, because we have to prove and we have to show the value of the exercise that we are undertaking at the moment. So if we go to the next slide.
No problem, Susanna. I just wanted to give a little time check. We are running close to the time limit, if that's all right.
No, but hopefully we're not too far off from
no problem.
Andy.
Thanks, Sue. I will keep this short then, Rebecca. Hi everyone, I'm Andy Wainwright. I'm our head of whole electricity system, and as Javid sort of mentioned earlier, one of the outputs of his work reviewing the planning assumptions for battery storage has been the opportunity initially for battery energy storage to offer up a non-firm proposal. So that's where my team comes in terms of the detailed development of what that proposal would look like and how we make it work for us in terms of system operability. So just to sort of give you a brief overview, you know, we're very much in a space with the Northeast, as we are in other parts of the country, where this is a complex position where we've got potentially nested constraints, some of which are across the TD interface. And then, you know, we'd be looking at something similar to approaches we've taken elsewhere in the country around some of the opportunities for headroom and specific GSP limits. So I won't, in the interest of time, go into when we actually use them, but we will be looking at introducing them in the Northeast as well. And then secondly, where those limitations are on the wider transmission system, you know, that very much falls into a similar program of work to the ones we've been doing further south with UKPN and what is now NGED, around sort of the regional development programs and specifically the megawatt dispatch projects. Really the importance of having our national control centre with visibility and control of the DER. So hopefully in the next few weeks, we'll begin to engage a bit more with this element of the 5-point plan. Process-wise, it will need to dovetail into the elements that both Sue and Javid have talked about earlier, because what's really important is we do this in a coordinated way that works for customers both at transmission and distribution. And with that, I'll hand over to John Toomey to, oh, no, we've got connections reform. Yeah, back to Sue, sorry.
I'll do a very quick promise. Just to go to the timeline, we can mainly go to the timeline. So as you might have heard, we have been working very hard on a connections reform project that started in October, was an acceleration of 6 months on our original timeline. We are currently under phase 2, so we're in design phase. We issued a case for change report in December 21, December 22. That report is available on our website as well. It's also, the link is on this slide deck that will be supplied later on. This link is here. What we're saying is at the moment we are designing what the new process could look like. We're working with the industry to do so. We're working across the piece with network operators, customers, stakeholders, and other institutions within the energy industry to make sure we develop the right process. And just say we will be going to consultation across kind of May, June time. So it'll be an opportunity again for industry to input into that process to then follow up with developing the implementation of the chosen solution for what the new process shall look like. That's a very quick stop, and just another addition at the end is there are more slides for it. I won't go through all of this detail. Right at the end for the ESO presentation, there is the fact that we are releasing GB-wide our new connections portal to facilitate engagement, to facilitate information, and also hopefully improve in the way we engage and communicate with our customers, including MPG and others that I know on this call, our transmission customers as well. There will be a wider release on the 13th of March, so on Monday. You see the portal going live on our website. And we'll be following up with some focus groups in May. So I'll leave the SO part to that because we run over time as well.
Thanks, Susanna. So good afternoon, everyone. This is John Toomey here from National Grid Electricity Transmission. So it's the TO part of National Grid that physically owns the assets and will go out and deliver the capacity for different areas within England and Wales. So conscious of time, I'm going to try and just go through this a bit of pace because I know that we want to have this sufficient time for Q&A at the end. So if we just go to the next slide. So this slide is just recapping I think what the ESO has already been taking us through. So the messages that I wanted to give here is that we know there's obviously significant challenges about providing dates that customers are looking for going through the process. Obviously the pipeline, just in England and Wales alone, we have around 182 gigawatts of future projects looking to connect to the transmission system in England and Wales. That's huge, double the amount that's kind of installed on the system today. We equally have around 60% of contracts that are in place, which are delivered in tune with expectations, which what customers are asking for. The reality there is that we know not all of those projects are going to go ahead. Some will come up against natural challenges from a planning consenting perspective. So some of the initiatives that Suzanne has talked about in terms of queue management could be really key in terms of trying to make sure that we've got the right structure and prioritisation of projects going through. And equally, the last point I just wanted to touch upon is the fact that we also are seeing projects with really different characteristics coming through. So we obviously have some larger projects with longer lead times, like offshore wind farms and nuclear power stations, but we are now seeing a lot more smaller, more agile and nimble projects coming through around sort of 50 megawatts, particularly in the battery and solar technology areas. So we need a different form of product and offering to accommodate all of those characteristics from customers. If we go to the next slide, what I'm just going to talk through is what our current plans look like to provide more capacity on the system. So if the ESO's talked about some of the more commercial initiatives that are ongoing to look at how tech is allocated across the system, this is actually how we are physically providing more capacity to the transmission system in the area. So what we're seeing, we've got over 30 gigawatts now contracted generation, particularly in this area across sort of northeast Yorkshire, sort of Humber area. We are seeing a number of diverse sets of technologies coming through. So obviously a lot of big offshore wind farms planned across the East Coast. We've got connected interconnectors and contracted interconnectors looking to connect in this area, along with a whole host of high volume of new batteries and solar farms as well. The system continues to predominantly see north to south power flows, as you'd expect, coming down through Scotland across sort of the B6 boundary. So our kind of strategy in this area is one, looking at how we can uprate the existing network in this area. So we call that reconductoring, so how we can kind of make more capacities on existing lines. However, we are kind of seeing the need that we need to increase the capacity of substations with new supergrid transformers. In some cases, we need new substations because our existing substations are coming up to capacity because everyone needs a physical connection to the system. And in a number of cases now, we are seeing the need for new overhead line circuits, which obviously is a big undertaking given the level of infrastructure that is needed. One big project probably to flag in this particular area is an uprating solution from Norton right the way through to Lackenbury and Thornton and down to Thornton. That is one of the significant projects that we're looking at to provide the need for the capacity out of the group in line with the north to south power flows. There are, however, foreseen a number of like supergrid transformers and such likes that are needed at different grid supply points, which obviously feed Northern Power Grid's network. If we just go on to the next slide, if we go then further south into the region, again, there's a whole host of different schemes of which some are reconductoring, so uprating existing networks, which may or may need some form of planning, depending on the existing planning that was put in place for them. And then a number of new overhead lines, so the likes of a new line out of the Creaky Beck group, all the way down to High Marnham has been something that needs to be delivered for more capacity in this part of the network. And a new overhead line from South Humber down to the South Lincolnshire area is something that's triggered. And a number of these have been in scope for the HND. So my kind of conclusions around this is that it's kind of vital that kind of from a development and planning perspective, we obviously need to go at this in pace to deliver in line with timescales. Kind of we know that. In the case of reconductoring, it is more around system access. So we are seeing different parts of the network all needing uprating. There's a natural level of competition between taking circuits out in certain areas and then what that means for other areas of the country. There needs to be a really efficient plan. We're working really hard with ESO to kind of make sure that the plan is optimized, but clearly the security standards that exist from an industry perspective mean that you can only take so much network out at any one time. So that's what will need to be managed through that process. We just go into the next slide. So this slide is important from a regulatory perspective. So some of the new overhead lines that I just talked about in those other two slides. So the likes of the new overhead line from Creaky Beck to High Marnham, that's referred in this slide as the Humber Trent scheme, and similarly the South Humber to South Lincolnshire scheme that I talked about. The new overhead line there is referred to as Lincolnshire Green. So this slide is basically showing you a process that we've been through with Ofgem, where National Grid Electricity Transmission have been allocated 17 schemes that they need to deliver. It's come out of the work that's been led through the ESO's Holistic Network Design scheme for offshore wind. Why is this important? It's important because some of those new overhead lines I've talked about, we have the regulatory funding approval for that. So there is no regulatory process to go through. And there's a framework that's been established to incentivise the delivery of this infrastructure. It's a different framework to anything that existed before. It incentivises the delivery to time. And if you don't deliver on time, there are penalties linked to the delivery of the CapEx. So significantly different relationship with what needs to be done. So from a regulatory point of view, there is funding for some of the significant schemes out of this process. However, obviously a lot of work to do in terms of development and physical delivery. Next slide then just talks about holistically, what does this actually mean in practice and across sort of England and Wales. Kind of our kind of stat around this is that we've got to deliver 5 times more transmission infrastructure in the next 7 years than we have built in the previous 30 years. I think that's a really stark stat in terms of like the challenge that's in head. Now, some of the work that I've just, some of the conversation I've just talked about in terms of the regulatory funding is a big sort of marker to enable that. However, clearly there's a lot of work required in terms of efficiency, delivery of outage plans to reconduct the network, and also delivery of new overhead lines. And this isn't just about National Grid and what National Grid needs to do. This is about the industry and how we work together. So how we make sure that we're supporting this across the supply chain, working really closely with industry partners to do that. So the final slide, if we can just flick on to that, is just around how we are thinking about this differently, particularly from a supply chain perspective. So this is no longer commissioning work, it is thinking about it from a partnering perspective. It is also thinking about it strategically in terms of making sure that there's the right level of transparency and understanding with the supply chain about the work that needs to come. Clearly, there's a big strategy around enabling jobs and investment across the UK to make all of these things happen. And we can only do that if we are kind of all working together in a really harmonised way. So we're somewhat on a journey to do that. The building blocks are in place in terms of the funding and the process to do it, but clearly the physical delivery now lies ahead. Challenges with planning regime and obviously working with local communities to manage any of the implications of that. So I will pause there because I'm conscious of time. I think I will hand over now to Jim, who's going to talk for it from a Northern Power Grid perspective.
Yeah, thanks, John. And hopefully you can hear me okay. I can't see myself on the screen yet, but I'll continue. My name's Jim Cardwell. I'm Head of Distribution System Operation Policy. We've got a new DSO business unit now spun up in Northern Power Grid. I work in that. And one of the things we're doing in that is bringing together a lot of the customer interfaces and stakeholder interfaces together, including looking at some of these transmission, large connections, and also the interface with ourselves in Northern Power Grid and the ESO. I still can't see myself on the screen. I can still see John, but I'm going to assume that you can hear me, and I'm going to continue. Next slide, please. Okay, so in terms of in Northern Power Grid, here are the grid supply points that are impacted across our region at the moment. That's about 60% of our main interfaces with the transmission system. And we've got about 122 customers currently involved in these long lead times that are out there. And we've got some inquiries out to ESO at the moment, project regressions, mod apps, and some of those are coming back, and we expect about another 50 customers to join those 122, just based on knowing which grid supply points they're in and knowing where we've got these issues. And in our region, this is mainly about export onto the transmission system, and it's less about demand. Typically in the areas where we've got congestion on the transmission system, we're referring generation above 1 MVA, but electricity demand, it needs to be typically above 10 MVA before we'd need to refer it up, and it's typically export that's affecting us. I guess the key point is also we continue to see significant interest. There's still a lot of inquiries coming into us, and also acceptances to some of the EHV schemes and projects that we're offering there. So let's have the next slide, please. And I still can't see myself, but I'll continue nonetheless. So in terms of what it means for people, I guess the first theme that we've got here is on industry collaboration. And what you've heard from the ESO in terms of some of the 5 projects that the ESO has written out on recently and said that they're delivering. In addition to that, there's also some collaborative work going on through the Energy Networks Association between transmission and distribution companies, and looking at these 3 areas you see on the left of this slide. One on queue optimization. So we're looking at what we do with the connection queues we've got, and looking to see if there are stalled projects and thinking about what we can do about that. You've heard from the ESO what they're doing with their transmission contracts in terms of milestones in them. Since 2017 in distribution, we have got project milestones, so we do have some contractual rights to optimize those queues, and we're looking to see how we can exercise that in a proportionate and fair way to make sure that we can make way for projects that can proceed. And we're doing that across DNOs to make sure that we're going for a sort of consistent view on how we do that. We're also looking at delegated limits. So this is really us having a conversation between distribution companies and the ESO. And currently we tend to work on a individual customer kind of basis in terms of which Appendix G part that each of you as customers are in, but we're looking to see, can we move to a situation where we have some delegated authority there on that, which is a very live conversation. And lastly there, this is about if we're going to move to some more some smarter connections, some more flexible connections with some interim running arrangements, we might need to get more information at the point of inquiry from yourselves as customers, particularly on profiles and things. So related, I guess, to some of the questions I've seen on batteries, for example, we might need some more information on profiles and things so we can work out what we can get on the system and get some more information than we have today to enable us with those judgments. So that's some of the industry collaboration work that's going on. Just wanted to sow the seeds of that. But then moving forward into Northern Power Grid and some of our commitments on the right of this slide, we recognise the need. Sorry, if we can just go back one, please. I haven't quite finished there. Thank you. So, so in terms of our commitments, we're looking to see how we can communicate more effectively with you in terms of where you stand on things, and looking to see how we can do that. So I'd be interested in your views on any of the points you see there. I guess in terms of this webinar, for example, we're looking to repeat this in the summer and give you an update on that and stand together with the transmission companies so we can give a joined up view to you. But we're also having conversations with you as individual customers on what we can do and making sure you've got the information you need from us. So yeah, next slide, please now. Thank you. So just a summary before I hand back to yourself, Becca, and we can get into the Q&A. Obviously, as I said, we are issuing a lot of connection quotations at the moment, and they are now in the 2-stage transmission offer process that kicked in from the 1st of March. So that's now going. As you've heard already, we'll be looking to see if we can get people connected with flexible connections where possible, and see if we can get people on the system through that mechanism. We do expect that the ESO initiatives, the number of those that you've heard about there, should improve the situation for a number of customers. We'll be dealing with the ESO to see how that how those processes work through and what the interplay is between what the ESO is changing at the transmission level and what we need to do at the distribution level as we progress those through the course of this year. We are seeking further improvements on top of that. So that's the collaboration with the network companies I've talked to you about. And finally, just on this slide, I'd just say that of course, there's also the access SCR decision that we're working through at the moment. That does mean that some costs are socialised. Typically, that's distribution costs, not transmission costs for people connecting at distribution. But it'd be a bit odd if I didn't say anything about that, because that kicks in with some new rules there from the 1st of April. So I wanted to keep in mind. But as the strapline says here, I suppose we're eager to look for seeking improvements for our customers where we can, in terms of particularly the timescales, but also the costs and the offers we're handing out. So that's it from a Northern Power Grid position. Becca, I'm going to hand back to you. I think we're into Q&A now, aren't we?
Great, thank you, Jim. Yes, so we'll move into the Q&A. So as I mentioned, we did get a lot of questions submitted before the session. I think many of those questions have probably been answered via the presentations already. But if I don't come to your question, it is something you would still like to pose to the speakers, then please do feel free to drop it in the chat. Okay, so in terms of the first question, I'm going to go to one of the questions that was submitted in advance. This is a question, if I could start with you, please, Susanna, but feel free to direct the question to another member of your team. Is there any ability to expedite grid connections in the queue that have planning and land agreements in place above those applications for a connection which do not have planning or land leases agreed?
Thanks very much. So at the moment, as we said earlier, because of the way we have first come, first served basis, we are not able to expedite those projects that don't get planning. There are every project has got a project program with it. The customers at the moment are still able to do mod apps. They're still able to do modification applications to move the date backwards. So we're constantly under that world. This is why we want to introduce queue management clauses, because we be able to really terminate contracts for some of those early clauses, such as planning, to enable those that are actually developing their projects and progressing their projects upon signing a contract to be treated more fairly in a way.
Great, thank you very much for that, Susanna. So the next question, I'll just go to one from the chat. So this is a question for Northern Power Grid, and I think probably best for you, Mark. So it's a question from Trung Tran. Will MPG align with NGASO on the new CPAs and BESS treatment?
Thanks, Becca. Can I just separate that question out into a number of components? So in terms of CPA, I think the best thing, first of all, is for us actually to do some more active management of the queues. Our queues are nowhere near, for individual projects, the same length as the ESO. You're only normally talking about, at worst, 4 or 5 projects ahead of another job when the design engineers are assessing it. So we will certainly look at CPAs. That needs to be common across all distribution businesses. But I think queue management and more active queue management is probably the key, personally, at our level, that I think will help solve that. Then onto the BESS treatment, or the BESS treatment, there's a couple of different aspects to that. In terms of the ESO was talking about curtailed connections. As Jim said, that is something we already offer. So where you get a certain constraint occurring with the distribution connected battery storage that is then causing, under certain network circumstances, a problem in our network, you will see coming through in the vast majority of our offers, those as being flexible connections for the distribution component. But a large number of the larger BESS connections are direct connections anyway onto the interface points with the NGET. And then the other aspect, I think, was about the zero modeling assumption that was being made. I think the important point there, and it was brought out on the ESO slides, was it is under certain system conditions where export is unlikely. So that comes back to the observation Jim made about ensuring that we get the right information to then enable us to make that type of assumption. And we also need more evidence as well of what actually happens when everybody does charge under the same regimes and we get secondary peaks occurring on the network, because some of the initial evidence that we've looked at on part of our network says that that is a credible risk as well. But we'll be working with other DNOs as part of the ENA through the Strategic Connections Working Group. There's a work stream specifically in that, looking at BESS technology and some of the assumptions that we make.
Great, thank you for that, Mark. A question on the TEC amnesty, which I think you talked through, Susanne. I'm not quite sure if this is a question for you or NPG, but the question is in regards to that, does it also include a refund of any payments to NPG already paid?
So we're talking about transmission connecting parties. So these are transmission connection contracts. And so we're not talking about DNO connected parties on these systems.
Okay, thank you for that. Another question from Charles Deacon. It wasn't clear from the consultation nor the responses, but will embedded IDNO connections be treated the same as DNOs with DG in terms of QM?
I don't know if Kavita is on the call. I wish I knew all the detail, which I don't, which is probably quite bad. If Kavita is on the call, because I know she was trying to get in, we can always respond to Charles in detail, just because I don't know what changed on the last voting as well and last communication, so we can pick that up.
Okay, no problem. Either pick that up in the chat or pick that up outside the meeting.
Yeah, we'll
Great.
probably pick that up outside again.
Okay, great. Another question from Charles Deacon. So I think this is a question for you, Jim. Will MPG be making a firm commitment to submit project progressions on time?
Yeah, so at the moment we are, I think project progressions are generally going into ESO. I mean, an old way that we used to do it was to sort of bundle them up more, and now we're not. We recognise from the customer feedback we had in terms of the importance of timely submission to the ESO. So that's what we're doing. And typically they're taking around 3 months at the moment, probably, to go to the ESO from the time that a customer connects to us. So that's the kind of timescales that we're talking about at the moment.
Thank you for that, Jim. Another question in regards to a date. So Susanna, I think this is one for you again. This one came in advance of the session. So assuming that any statement of works offer that is issued in the next 9 months has very long connection dates, is there any guidance on what the real, in inverted commas, connection timescales will look like after ESO has optimized their offers?
So yeah, as part of that process, we will be looking to confirm what the earliest connection date will look like. So for anyone that's already contracted, already in the queue, we'll confirm that date. And then for any of those under the two-step offer, we will go back to update if there's been an improvement to that date as well.
Great, thanks for that, Susanna. A question on the battery remodeling in the chat there. So will the battery remodeling apply to SGTs? Is that one for you again, Susanna?
I don't know if Javier wants to come in or.
Yeah, sure. I can pick that one up. So it's fair to say, I think this is something that we are currently discussing with NGET at the moment. So in terms of the transmission review or transmission reinforcements work that we are essentially looking at the moment, the majority of what's holding customer back are these long sort of lead time reinforcements that John mentioned. So essentially there's big overhead lines that are driving connection dates into the next decade. But essentially this is the priority that we'll be looking at the moment to see whether for certain customers these long lead time reinforcements are actually required.
Great. Thank you for that, Javid. We've got a question from Andy Wilson from Rotherham MBC. Jim, I might need your help directing this question in the right place if it's not one for you. But any news on a formal method of connection ramp up, providing partial load sooner to get projects up and running, and a roadmap to meet anticipated full demand?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Thanks for the question. I think it might be one to take offline, Becca, and maybe discuss with Andy about what sort of projects. However, I would just say, I mean, ultimately it does feed into the point I made and Mark sort of reinforced when he was responding earlier, that we are, that's the point, I suppose, of getting more information at the time when connections are being applied for, because this is very much the world we're moving into now, which is much more about seeing how we can fit different connections together and make more use of the system capacity and capability that we've got. And we're certainly seeing this as a growth area for what we can do going forward as a way to get more people connected more quickly.
Great, thanks for that, Jim. Another question, I'll direct it to you, Susanna. In the first instance, would customers be allowed to decline follow-up offers without penalties?
So it is a negotiation to try to understand if the improved offer works for you. So yeah, there's no assumption that you would just accept an improved date. And we are looking, John will probably nod as we go along, because we are looking at probably engaging with the industry ahead of that point of ascertaining what the date will be to see what dates could work for customers if the data improves, because we're trying to see if there's any insight that we can get as early as possible on what dates work for customers as well.
Okay, thank you for that. And the next question that I've got in the chat here, so is from Charles Deacon. As full offer for the cost is going to be charged, what is the anticipated cost to produce stage 1 if it were cancelled later?
That is something we are working through to ascertain. So because we never had this process, we were trying to see when we released the first ones to ascertain the actual level of work with those in real time. And then we'll look if a customer doesn't progress to then confirm, and we have to be completely transparent what those costs are as well. So we will be working through if we get ones that are issued and then are progressed to provide a view to customers. And Charles, just to confirm, because I missed a bit on the question, that's why I was a bit puzzled on the nested, on your first question in regards to nested IDNOs. So in regards to the queue position is taken by the DNO, so the DNO will be managed within the queue, and any changes that come from the back of that queue management clauses will then be cascaded down by the DNO to the IDNO in that queue as well. Hopefully that answers the question on the queue management.
Brilliant, thanks for that, Susanna. Question for you, Jim, I think. So there's a comment around Northern Power Grid's mod app outcome letters being not fit for purpose. When will they be updated?
Yeah, I think, I mean, this is something that's been changing through time, Becca. So I'm not sure when this is date stamped, this comment, if you like, and maybe we can have a bit more information as to what information will be useful to have on them that is not today. Because I think that's some area where we have been seeking to make them more useful and get more information on them.
Okay, great. Thank you for that, Jim. So I'm just scanning the chat here for any new questions. Again, if you did submit a question in advance that you don't feel I've gotten to, if you could please ask that again within the chat, that would be excellent. So another question from, I will go to this one from James Potter. So where developer accepts an initial offer, will the stage 2 offer always be equivalent or less onerous in respect of point of connection, cost, voltage, connection date, etc.? With the new base modelling methodology, is it plausible that some generation only sites will not need to form part of project progressions that I am sure will be shown in their initial offer? Is that a question for you, Susanna?
Yeah, I'll give it a try in terms of going through the parts of it. So in terms of their first offer will not contain the level of detail that you've been accustomed to in regards to the scope, the program, and even on the wider transmission or enabling transmission works that be associated with that. That offer will be based on the current known timescales for that GSP, for example, in question, that part of the network. That's what's going to form the baseline of that offer, the first step. What will happen is on the second step offer, you will get the detail. So we will engage with you as we're getting ready to be in a position to provide an offer. We'll engage with you to talk through that, what that detail is. So that's when you'll know exactly the scopes, the requirements, the program, etc. So that's the difference. The first step is very much what is necessary to make sure that you've got something that gives you a point of connection, that if you wanted to progress with some actions from planning and funding perspective, you've got something that is valuable and a valid contract that meets the requirements. And then we'll go to the detail. And that's why on the first contract, you have 0 securities, because we're not providing the level of detail in terms of scope and program, etc. I think that's the first part of the question. Now I've got the second part, so Rebecca, I don't know if you...
So the second part of the question was, with the new base modelling methodology, is it plausible that some generation only sites will not need to form part of project progressions that I'm sure will be shown in their initial offer? Is that what you meant, Susanna, or is that what you've already
I think
covered?
Yeah, so in terms of project progression, we study that connection. The connection that comes forward from the DNOs. We'll study what were the connections at one point in time in the queue. And the baseline that is done for doing those assumptions is the baseline is an assumption. What we actually offer takes into consideration what is in the project progression. No one will be removed from that offer. It's just the assessment we'll do is an assessment based on what we think will actually come to connect. And there's ways whereby we manage that if things change, if we actually have more connections going forwards, we do studies. There are other teams in the background that will be doing a review of what's going forwards connect. But nothing changes in terms of the offer The only reason that would change in terms of what's there on the list of project progressions or in terms of customers if it's driven by the DNO. Hopefully that answers the question.
Great, thanks for that, Susanna. I'm going to go to a question next from Mark Roberts. So now that there is a proposal to change the base assumptions, if those changes are approved, can sites that were refused a connection based on local grid constraints be reviewed and previous costs paid be taken into account?
I guess it's for me.
I think so.
So if anyone rejected and someone didn't accept the offer based on or decided to cancel a connection they have with NPG because of the transmission kind of constraints or the times for connection were delayed because of that, it means that you're no longer in the queue. If you're no longer in the queue, we're not able to look at your connection, and that's unfortunately is the consequence of events, is something that we're looking now in terms of how we can improve those connection timescales. We don't know at the moment if the dial will change or not. We hope we will. We're trying to improve. We're trying to look at things differently to improve connection timescales. Anyone that's terminated a contract, they decided not to progress, unfortunately, you're not in the queue anymore, so we won't be able to assess that.
Okay, thanks for that, Susanna. Question I'll direct to you, Jim. When will MPG publish the project progression summary on their website?
Yeah, this is one of the things we're looking at the moment, Becca, in terms of sort of weighing that up with all the other priorities we've got and trying to work out which we should prioritize. So I'm not in a position today where I can give you a date, but I think, suffice to say, it's one of the commitments we're making, and we'll be able to give some more information in the not too distant future.
Great. Thanks, Jim. Just another question I'll put to you around, there's a few questions, comments in the chat around general communication and what plans there are from Northern Power Grid to improve that.
Yeah, so I think that, I'd link the two together, really. The one you just asked me about, the updates to our website and project progressions. I mean, one of the things, and I'll link it if I can, Becca, sorry, I know it's your job, but I'll try and stretch it. There was another question about have we got enough people, essentially. I think it was another one from Gary saying have we got sufficient people, and are there any and also saying that we need to raise our game with communication, I think was the feature of the question or the comment. So yeah, we do have plans to get some more people on board, and the priority of that, and this is part of, I'll link it to my point about the DSO business unit and about having more people at the sort of heart of a lot of our customer relationships here. And we are looking to get some more people here so that we can get more information to people, and hopefully make some changes that our customers will support and will appreciate.
Great, thank you for that, Jim. There's a question for you, Susanna, on the TEC amnesty. So when you presented, I know you discussed the sort of the amount of interest that had been in that, but there's a question around whether the progress looks promising in that area.
Not as promising as I would like it, to be honest. And the reason is because of the value of a transmission connection contract. And I guess the fact that the queue management CASC modification decision has now been pushed back, delayed, it kind of takes away some of the pressures for those that don't have a valuable project or a valid project to come out of the queue. Still, 5.5 gigawatts is more than what expected. What we'll do, my team is doing, is still engaging with customers, still having the conversations to try to bring forward anyone in the meantime. And as I said earlier, we are now considering if we're having to extend it because of the issue with the queue management as well.
Okay, thank you for that, Susanna. Just another question that's just dropped in the chat, Jim, around how you were treating behind the meter connection with export arrangements.
Yeah, thanks for your question, Aditya. I'm not sure. Is there another Northern Power Grid person who could offer me a perspective on that?
Jim, I'm not sure if this is around export limited connections, but that's what we've been pushing through as a way to actually get people connected and making best use of the low carbon generation that they're trying to connect. That's certainly something we've pushed through on a number of projects with the ESO, and that's been quite successful in getting people connected up.
Thanks,
Great.
Mark.
Thank you for that. I'm just scanning through the questions here. There aren't any other questions that are jumping jumping out to me that I feel like we haven't covered either in the presentation or in the Q&A so far. I don't know if there's any general comments you want to make, Jim, based on your scan of the Q&A there.
I think there was one I wanted to pick up on, Becca. I was waiting for you to pick up on it, but I'll help you there as well, which was one about I think there was a question from somebody. Sorry, it's a big old chat room now, so I might have lost my place a bit. But it was one about why do RDPs take so long, or something of that order. So, because Andy covered this in some of his comments, and I might invite Andy to sort of comment on that. But where in some of Andy's slides, when from the ESO perspective, he was pointing at the southeast and the southwest, where there are some quite well established actually RDPs, regional development programs, that are taking place there. And I guess we're not rolling them out in the northeast and Yorkshire at the moment because of the other changes that the ESO is making. That there's so many other things moving around, and one of the features of a lot of the transmission constraints we're seeing, which I think came through from some of John's comments from NGET, are that quite often we're seeing a local constraint at a grid supply point and then a wider area constraint. And some of that's going to change as a result of all the other programs that are going through at the moment. So where we're seeking to focus our attention is less on regional development programs, which are more complex, and just trying to see if there are some quicker wins to get some people on, which was back to the point about having some, as Mark just said there, either about some sort of curtailment offer to get somebody connected, or some kind of active network management or flexible connection. So that's where we're seeking to generate our attention in that sort of area, rather than a wider regional development program. As I said, because there's so many other things moving around at the moment, and we hope some of those other things that are moving around will themselves deliver benefit. So we think that's the way that customers will benefit. But Andy, I just invite you to, is there anything you want to say on that? Is that a fair representation?
I think for me, okay, if we look at the work we're doing with NGED and UKPN, I think the stats I saw early in the week is we've released about 600 megawatts of projects in the southwest and across both already, and across both we're sort of looking at close to 2 gigawatts potentially by the end of this calendar year. Both of those, the driver was very much distribution connected parties, and what's caused the tardiness in this particular case has been the interactions with transmission as well. So as I sort of mentioned on my piece, it's very important in these situations where the constraints are driven by the transmission system that we look for a whole system solution that treats everyone equitably, and that's what's prolonged the process. And that's why it's so important, as I mentioned, that we tie in with the other activities we're doing, that both Javid and Sue have mentioned, and are both quite well advanced and progressed and communicated with stakeholders. So if we look at the functionality that we're developing through the RDPs, both the local stuff that we've managed to do by picking things off, like Jim's mentioned, in areas like East Anglia, but also some of the broader bits that Javid's talked about around non-firm, the solutions, the ways of working we've developed with both NGED and UKPN are easily transferable to some of these other projects as well. And that's the route we're now looking to take to deliver some of the non-firm options that we've been progressing from the work on BESS. So I know it's been frustrating for stakeholders. I can only apologise on behalf of the ESO, but we have turned the corner. We have done a lot of that work, and we do have a solution that we're really sort of keen to start engaging with stakeholders from, and try and work out how we can make it work both for our control centre, but also for your projects as well.
Great. Thanks for that, Andy. Thanks for that, Jim, as well. So I'm conscious of time, so I think we'll move to close. As I've mentioned, any questions that we haven't managed to get to, we will pick up outside the meeting. And Paul, I'm just going to hand back to you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Becca. And I want to thank everybody for sending their questions through. And thanks to the MPG and ESO and NGET teams for giving the presentations. I hope everybody who's joined it can see that whilst things haven't been good and are not absolutely sorted yet. There is a work in place and there's a pathway to improve what we're doing. We in Northern Power Grid have 8 gigawatts in a pipeline that we've been working through. So the amount of connections that are still coming through at the rates, of around about half a gigawatt a week at the moment, we're issuing incredible amount of connection offers going out there. We're building that new team, and I noticed there was a question in the chat around a dedicated project progression, transmission, distribution discussion team. We've got that team. It's been running since last summer, and we're adding to that team because we see this as a major issue and where we want to help customers connect. So that we expect an update on this webinar in the summer at some point in time, where we'll come back and talk through where the work's got. I'm hoping that people on this call and this webinar can see that there's some optimistic signs that things will improve. Just see you when we can in bilaterals, and we'll keep talking to our customers best way we can to get you through this period. But we're hoping that we'll get revised offers, new situations while it's still 2023 in collaboration with Get and ESO. Thanks, everybody.
Great, thanks very much for that, Paul. So just a couple of quick housekeeping bits before we close. So we did notice we've got a large number of stakeholders who attended the session that we didn't have sign-up details for, which is fantastic. But after the session, we will be circulating a recording and also the slides from today. So you can use the email address that's currently on the screen to drop an email to Northern Power Grid, and then we can ensure that you're included within that list for the circulation of the slides and the recording. Also would invite you to submit any feedback that you've got on today's session via that same email address as well. Okay, so I think that's it for today. So thank you very much, everyone, for your participation. Have a good afternoon.